All right. Hello and welcome everyone to a builds refresh for Frost. So, as of the major update, I think this is the last big builds refresh that we need to do. If I am missing anything, please let me know in the comments. Just don't say Sevagoth because I know he's an Exalted Warframe, but we're still not using that thing as compared to my last build for Sevagoth. But other than that, please let me know if there's any Warframes you think I missed that have received some pretty impactful changes as of the latest update. But with that, let's talk about Frost. Now, Frost is the lowest priority. I'm doing him last, as you can see, of the update. And that is because he pretty much just got a Gemini and then otherwise has just received some small things over time that have kind of shifted his build a bit. So, starting with the shards, we're on 2 yellow shards, 1 casting, and 1 parkour. Both nice to have, both not needed at all. Totally, like, optional completely, just up to taste. But then we also do have 1 15% ability strength Tau shard. This one does make an impact on the build, so you will need to account for not having this if you don't have one in your build, but we'll talk about exactly what that's doing. And we will start with talking about that, just talking about the strength considerations on this build. So we're on Transient Fortitude, we're on Umbral Intensify, and we're on Overextended, setting us up with that extra 15% after Power Drift at 169% nice strength. That 169 is actually very important because if we look at Avalanche, we're at exactly 101% armor reduction. Now, being over 100% armor reduction does not matter as much now as it has in the past, but it is still certainly very nice to have. So getting to 100% was important for me, and that's mostly what that shard is doing, just making it so that we start at 100% armor strip, not having to work up with Molt Augmented to get up to that nice 239% that we will eventually end up at after this is fully stacked. So that is the consideration for that shard. Absolutely not needed, but it definitely makes things get up and running right off the bat. Now, other things that are very notable in this build, we are on Freeze, Force, and Icy Avalanche. We need both of these augments. First and foremost, because Icy Avalanche is irreplaceable. This gives us all of the defenses that both us and our entire team are all going to want. It freezes all the enemies, it removes all their armor, and then we and everyone on our team get Overguard, which is going to do a great job of protecting everybody in the squad, and all your teammates in any given mission will pretty much just always appreciate that. Then we've got Freeze Force to talk about. So this is just a big cold damage buff. That's all that's going on here. It's 169% extra damage. That is, of course, going to increase alongside Molt Augmented, so it'll end up at 239, which is quite good. And the reason that we're only on these 2 augments, because I know a lot of people are going to talk about Biting Frost, is because Biting Frost doesn't do a thing that this build wants, which we'll talk about in a moment, but also is not very useful. So this is Frost gains 200% critical chance and 200% critical damage against frozen enemies. That sounds good, but the fact that it is not against, like, enemies that have cold procs on them, and is instead specifically against frozen enemies, means that this is just not very compelling. Most enemies that would be of reasonable threat or be tanky enough for these buffs to matter don't freeze, so this is just mostly a wasted slot. You can certainly try and make room for it if you really, really want to include this because you need the number to be red and that mean the build good, but it's just not that important. Additionally, Freeze Force will buff our primary strategy on Frost, which is doing Sobek Zada things. We do have Zada's Whisper over R2. This is going to give us that like extra hit of void damage, and that extra hit is also going to be affected by Freeze Force whenever it is shot through the Sobek on its big AoE. We'll show exactly how that works. It's not worth going into the weeds and explaining exactly what's happening, but you'll see its performance, and I think you'll quite like it. Otherwise, on this build, we are on plenty of range, stretch plus overextended. You could theoretically make the argument that you could go just for stretch and it is something like an augur reach, but personally, I really like the 235% range. Having that nice 35-meter radius on R4, I find to be quite good. Otherwise, we're on prime continuity. That is in part to counteract the negative duration from Transient Fortitude, but also because I want my 1 and my 2 buffs to last a good long time, so I don't have to recast them all the time. And then otherwise, I currently have Primed Flow in here. Now, Primed Flow would probably be my choice most of the time, but currently, this Arcane is not working how it should be. So speaking of enemies being frozen, being kind of annoying, this is on enemy frozen, get 2% ability strength and 2% ability duration for 15 seconds, and that stacks up to 20 times. So this right now, as of my testing in quite a number of different missions, will only give you like 2, sometimes 3 stacks any given time you cast your 4, no matter how many enemies you freeze. It also is not triggered by Death Cube freezing enemies with the Tazakor, and it's just super inconsistent and also bad. So there is another option besides Prime Flow, because we kind of have an open Arcane slot that doesn't really have a better fill, other than if you wanted to, of course, put a weapon buffing Arcane in there, that'd be very reasonable. Instead, the thing that I like to go for is actually Umbral Fiber. So Umbral Fiber does a few things for us. Number one, our snow globe is scaled off armor, so it'll be a little bit stronger. The amount of overguard that we get from enemies as our conversion is going to be based on our armor, so that's also quite nice. And also, if enemies ever get to our health, I guess we get a little bit of tankiness that way, though that doesn't really matter. With that, switching to Umbral Fiber means that instead of Flow, we can actually run Battery here, and this is going to not give us quite as much energy, but it will still give us a very comparable amount of energy with Umbral Fiber instead of Flow, and we also get the additional 11% strength, which is a nice little bump too. So I actually quite like this over running Flow, mostly because, once again, Ice Storm just doesn't work right, which is kind of a shame, but I think a lot of people will probably end up liking this better anyway, because the additional armor does positively affect your abilities. Now, the last thing to note is that Arcane Battery does have a synergy with Frost's passive that allows you to hold more energy than you might expect. So the passive for Frost, for those that don't know, cold status effects for Frost last longer. That's all well and good, but Frost gains 50 armor for each enemy afflicted with cold within affinity range. Now, there's also some weirdness with this passive. This appears to be for some duration, or it is sticky to you in some way. Because I've noted that your armor doesn't go down very often while using this with battery, and you'll just keep a much larger energy max than you maybe should. That might be a bug right now, but even if it was working differently than it is now, as long as we get that 367, which we always do, you're going to be just fine on battery. But you'll notice some weirdness where you can sometimes hold a really, really large amount of energy, getting close to that Arcane Battery cap sometimes. Which is always nice. I mean, holding 1,000 energy sounds good to me. But yeah, that is going to do it for kind of what's going on the Frost build here. Of course, for this build, we do need to show the Sobek. Now, this is just the same build that I've been using on the Sobek, and the one that I showed off in the Kuva video. But it's this. This is an electric Sobek. We use electricity because we want the damage to happen instantaneously. And this is just kind of your usual run-of-the-mill stuff on the Sobek. Acid Shells is the core synergy point here, because this is a kind of pretty much raw synergy build. This AoE, this 15 meter, 45% enemy max health AoE as corrosive damage. Number one, whenever you use Zadas buffs the explosion, and that buffed explosion by Zadas is also buffed by Freeze Force. So those two things buffing it mean that Acid Shells explosions can just chain kill entire maps of enemies very effectively, provided all those enemies are within 15 meter radius of one another, making this a very effective group clear for Frost, who otherwise is just kind of weapons platforming whatever you happen to give him. Speaking of that, it's not like Frost is useless if he's not holding the Sobek, but I do think it is one of the best weapons for him. Any good weapon in his hands is going to do great. Obviously, you have the tankiness of your 4 to rely on in terms of getting lots of overguard. You can protect objectives with Snow Globe, as is the Huge. And then 2 big weapon buffs are pretty much going to make even mediocre weapons in your hands plenty for things like EDA and ETA. And then even melee weapons, your 1 does not interfere anymore with influence builds, so you can still use good melee weapons that are even on influence, and you'll get some cold procs alongside that. We're just on the Praetos here for some movement, as melee I think is probably not going to be your strong suit. Companion-wise, we are on Death Cube. Death Cube just for some more energy regeneration. We're going to be getting that out of Synth Deconstruct and Energy Generator, well, Energy Generator specifically on this build, and then otherwise just kind of doing normal Death Cube things, getting Guardian and just, little things out of Death Cube here. The Tazakor, though, is slightly different. We are on the Magnetic Viral Electricity version again, because we don't need cold procs. Frost already does that, so priming the enemies up with some viral and such is much better for what we're going to be outputting. With that, let's show how this build actually works. We've just got some enemies here. Their AI is on pause. Not that it's going to matter, because we're going to just immediately get rid of them and all of their armor. Turn on Zadas, turn on Freeze Force, and then just shoot an enemy. And when they die, everyone does. And that's pretty much what the whole deal here is. Because the Sobek AoE is affected by this, you can just do this to as large a group as you can freeze, basically. And they go away permanently. Now, it is extremely worth noting that you do have a significant buff on your 2, and a significant buff on your 1, and then the AoE scales but you do need to be able to kill the enemy that you are shooting with the Sobek. So it is in consideration that at really, 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 really high levels, we're talking like probably 6,000 plus, the Sobek actually will be a little bit slower than you might imagine, considering what you can see the kill rate is here at around level 230. So you do need to, like, you know, give it a little time at those levels and like the groups it can pop, and you want the CC and all that stuff. And Frost can provide that with his 4, even if it takes you a second to get an enemy actually dead, you can still do that. And also the viral priming from Death Cube actually really helps with that at the much higher levels too. Anyway, though, that's like kind of the deal. We can show a weapon like, you know, that's also just good, like the new core, and you're gonna note that, like, hey, turns out getting out, like, you know, getting all the armor off the enemies and putting freeze force on and everything is pretty good. Like, the enemies still just don't like this. They're left very vulnerable. We have almost 30k overguard, and it's not really going to threaten us. Honestly, the worst thing here is that the Zada's effect on us is this, like, infested goo that is all over us, and that ruins the fashion. That's probably the single most negative thing about this build on the whole. But if you want to bring Frost into, you know, you got Frost on ETA, you got a defense mission, throw up his 3, start using his 4, just shoot, guys, and it just works. But yeah, let's jump in to Tav and start doing some stuff and shooting some guys and showing off what the Sobek can do and how it can kind of snake through levels and things. All right, headed into Tav. This should be, you know, theoretically our last frame build video for a while. Do have some other stuff that I am going to be making. Because I've got, of course, got to do the ETA EDA guide update that I've been planning, and of course the Coda guide needs to happen. Though it seems like that system has been pretty intuitive for people, so I didn't prioritize that earlier. And yeah, just like it's been a good update. I think there's like a whole lot of just, you know, builds that have gotten much better, and things have been good. I will note a thing that I have seen over the course of making a lot of these build videos that I've seen kind of a lot is that people, for whatever reason, want me to do conjunction survival instead of Tav. I know that it's a higher level, but conjunction survival actually adds like a lot of like weird parameters that kind of aren't anywhere else. And that's stuff like, you know, you have like the ghost on that mission that can like increase your stats pretty significantly, and like just like, you know, sentient enemies are there, and also you have the enemies that spawn at those intervals that are like, you know, needing the operator and stuff. So I feel like it's not a great testing environment. Like, it's a fine mission, and it's like one of the more fun missions, I think, overall to run and farm out, and like farming Varuna is like pretty chill. But it's just not one that like I think bodes well for like a variety of different tests. Like, it's just not, like, you're getting like kind of overloaded with like additional parameters where a lot of missions just don't have that. So I think it's pretty strange when compared to like a lot of other missions. So let me know what you guys think about that, because like I just think it's like a little convoluted. And it's also not great for like, oh, I, you know, have to constantly be doing all these like sub objectives as opposed to showing like, well, what does this gun and like Warframe, what does it do to the enemies I'm actually going to be seeing like everywhere? Like, hey, just what is, you know, I got armored Grineer guys and just like regular, you know, enemies that just have regular health and just normal stuff. Like, what is it doing to them? So it's kind of a weird thing. Like, for me personally, I don't think conjunction is like a great fit for a testing environment. But I'd be curious to see what you guys think about that. Because I have like thought about going to it in the past, and that was like the reason that I didn't do that. But yeah. In terms of Frost, I mean, hey, as you can see, it's quite effective. Like, we can just like, you know, hit our 4 and then just like pop groups, and like having this amount of clear access is great. The Sobek, not inaccessible. I mean, you just farm Rathum. Actually, no, I think it's the actual Kella fight, I believe, for the Sobek mod. And like the Kuva Sobek is quite easy to get. Liches are the easiest adversary to fight. There's no MR restriction on the Kuva Sobek. And Frost himself, too, is a pretty easy build to put together. Like, I mean, if you're looking at something lower level, to get close to this, like, pretty simple build stuff to get in here, as long as you can get the augments. I think the augments are maybe like the biggest point of making this build fairly inaccessible, just because it's like, it's kind of the point for a lot of things, I think, is that for anyone who doesn't know, if you were a brand new player and you wanted to use a Warframe that kind of requires their augment to be functional, like I would say Frost in this case with his 4, at higher levels at least anyway, it would take you a full week of like always hitting cap and also increasing your MR every single day in order to like start getting augments from one syndicate. Which is kind of a lot, given that, like, for anyone that didn't see recently, Flynn, for those that don't know, Flynn, he's another content creator in the community, made a new account and just, like, saw how fast he could get to, like, being caught up and being able to do 1999, and, like, you know, be ready for whatever the next thing is. And it took him, like, 20 hours or so. And whenever, like, you know, the opposite of that is, like, well, how can I get Frost up to snuff? And it's like, well, you'll need to do a week of dailies before you really have the thing that makes Frost work. As that's kind of like, you know, his 4 augment is a stand-in for maybe a rework to like the defensive properties that Frost should maybe have. But I find that to be kind of a weird point. Certainly, though, it's going to be interesting given the information that I got from hearing about Flynn's run of this. The next free-to-play through, which should actually be very soon. Should be really interesting. I guess another thing that I would want to know, that if you guys have any interest, is I'm thinking about like doing a Warframe that I've not done on a free-to-play through before, and like kind of on purpose, just like choosing something else. And I think for that, I think I want to go with Nova, because she's been reworked since the last free-to-play through even happened. And I think is very, very compelling for new players, so that's kind of an interesting one, I think, to go for specifically, to kind of just like see if she might be a very strong path. She's also one that, again, doesn't require augments and things like that in order to really get going. So that's a huge positive. You can see this snaking the level if it can get like, you know, just a line of enemies. This build's like, you know, pretty self-explanatory. Very satisfying to like, you know, use your 4 and then like see the edge of a guy and like popcorn a room. I think it's a very like fun way to clear maps out. We're just at that 5 minutes. We're at 562, so like, you know, had a little over 100 kpm. Of course, this is, you know, for weapons platform frames. Like, I could use a better weapon, one that doesn't have like all the synergy and stuff with this, and just, you know, hold the torrid or whatever and be like, oh look, I'm at, you know, 200 kpm or whatever, just with my buffs, and you know, you can do all that stuff. But I wanted to show this on something that's like, you know, more accessible, because any given like decent Incarnate is gonna like make this kill rate look like child's play when set up properly. But that's not really the point. I think the point of this is that Frost is a good enough weapons platform to not need a good weapon to platform it. But if you have a weapon that has high synergy, that is of course a benefit, and that is what the Sobek specifically does. But I think that if you're someone that wants to play Frost, this was one of the things that kind of only Frost can really do. This type of thing is available on, like, you know, sort of anyone who can run Zadas, because Zadas is like the primary enabler. The other Warframe that this can be done on is, because Toxic Lash, which is a Saren ability for those who don't remember, works the same way as Zadas. Saren can do a build like this, but of course on Saren you have like her 1 and everything that you're usually going to want to be like using in your build, and it kind of is the antithesis of that a little bit. Just being a weapons platform, Saren is always a bit of a weird one, I find, though it's something that some people do enjoy. But yeah, it's a build that doesn't, I think, feel very unique to Frost, but like it's actually very hard to find the certain combination of factors where like you have to have a thing like Freeze Force, you have to have a thing, you have to have room for Zadas, and you have to have reasonable build considerations on the rest of your build that kind of work with the stats you'd want for those things. I think another Warframe where you could do it, but there's just better options with the other synergies. You probably could do it on Volt fairly easily. But of course, Volt has, like, you know, really wants to be melee focused in a whole lot of cases, I find. So that's more of the consideration for him. Yeah, so it kind of puts Frost in this weird spot where it's like, you know, right now he's kind of the guy for it. If you want to be like doing like this specific Sobek synergy type stuff, I really think that he is the place to be. Though, of course, this type of synergy is always rife for new Warframe has specific synergy with this like one weird augment on a shotgun, which is, of course, always going to be the thing of, like, hey, does the new Warframe break this old thing? We always love finding that. See that just, like, snake up the whole tower there, which is very satisfying also. This is a build that I just enjoy, I will say. This is one of those builds where it's, like, just, like, having the Sobek, like, go off and do its thing and, like, kill lines of enemies. I find it personally be very satisfying. Also, I mean, you guys already know. If you're here, I think you already know this. But, of course, one of the other benefits of making this video is getting to make the thumbnail. Because I'm sure that, like, so this this is past Zyme. You know more than me, but I'm sure I made the thumbnail like something Big Daddy Frost or the like, you know, like just Photoshop an image of Adam Sandler's head over Vesemir or Velemir, not Vesemir. That's The Witcher. But yeah, you know, I'm probably not going to do that. We don't disrespect the Gemini. So there are enough dad jokes here, I think, for that. One of the other things about, like, the percentage damage is, where's Torment at? Torment, where are you? There you are, Torment. You see, this is another enemy that, like, can't be frozen. They can look like they're frozen, but they are not. Ooh, good shockwave there. We're just about at, like, the 10-minute mark. Snaking that one is real satisfying. Being frozen here. Snake that all the way up. It's just a really, you know, I think it appeals to, like, the ARPG type of build, I think, this one. Which we don't usually get a whole lot of that type feel in Warframe. We're almost at the 10-minute mark here. If I can get like one more big bloom here, would be ideal. A decent one.
The longer you fight, the more successful we will be.
There's our 10-minute mark. Yeah, 1274. You know, nice 120 KPM or so. It is, of course, you know, weapon plus Warframe. So in something like ETA, you will get like a lower KPM or higher KPM based on the weapon that you do get. But that's just the way the cookie crumbles, after all. There's not really much to be done about it. It just kind of is the way that it's going to work in that style of content. But Frost's defensive properties, I think, are a pretty big sell there. He can do a pretty reasonable impression of a Dante or a Styanax in a supportive sense, and sometimes having the bubble on that defense target makes all the difference in the world. So yeah, that's going to do it for Frost. Nice little update. Obviously, I asked you all no end to questions, so let me know. And I'll see you tomorrow. Hey everybody, it's time to thank the patrons that are hanging around and supporting the channel. So, to start with that, the $10 patrons are Atheon, Alex Farnham, Arbiter Daydream, Barkus, Benuven, Plotomatic, Brutus Salazar, Candelathra, Blob World, Dylan Dworsky, Athrain, James Harsthorne, JC4 Science, Josh, Luzanth, Vicotel, Michta, Nerve, Ruby, Sanyu, Sharp247, The Coupon of Death, Waifu Wars, Wodad01, and Zerathir. Also, thanks, of course, to all of the other patrons for supporting the channel. It is much appreciated. It's a little sneak peek on what we're getting into. There's going to be a lot more of these kind of big re-reviews of weapon types and their new builds and stuff, as things changed a lot at the end of last year. And of course, there's also planned new free-to-play before we get into any more big updates. So look forward to that.